Hello Cards Chat, this is Matt Vaughan. Welcome back to another video. This one's going to be a little bit different than my last one. It's going to focus just on hand analysis. Now, this is something I'm going to be doing on and off, and as people tend to ask more questions in specifically my Ask Me Anything thread, that's what's going to mostly prompt these videos. I think that not every hand requires a video, but it's often easier to talk through some of the nuances by doing it through video. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. And going to be starting with this first hand from AK Most. And I want to talk a little bit just about process stuff first. So as I walk through this hand, I'm generally going to want to go decision point by decision point. It doesn't really matter what happened on the next street when I'm trying to decide sort of what the best course of action is on the current street. Although we can, of course, plan for certain outcomes. Like we can plan for different turn cards, or we can, plan for what our opponent might do. But we can't really go into this street knowing what the next street is, right? That's never how a real hand of poker works. And in general, we're going to want to keep this as close to a real poker hand process as possible, because then we're going to be able to bring that to bear at the table. Now, the info that he gives here about the decision making, we can sort of just ignore for the most part, because it's not like we have any super specific player reads. But what is going to be important here is that he says it's a $1.10 regular speed on ACR. So it is a tournament. It is a pretty small buy-in. And actually, as he says, I don't know if you like the small buy-ins, because people who are random clicking a lot there, and me, but I guess there are some ICM considerations, etc. So they are at a final table. There are 8 left in this 8 max event. So it's early in the final table, and we're facing a river lead shove for our tournament life. Now, we're going to look at the stack sizes first here, because they are important. In a tournament especially, they're going to be important because we have to potentially deal with ICM. ICM is an acronym that stands for Independent Chip Model, and it's used because not every chip in your stack is really worth the same as every other chip. Your last chip, your final chip that you have to put in the pot, is worth the most because it represents your tournament life. It represents basically your ability to just fold and maybe ladder up. It represents your ability to, get it all in and get called and still sometimes win the hand, and not ladder up necessarily, but put yourself in a better position to ladder up. And so that chip is the most valuable. Each chip on top of it is slightly less valuable, and that progresses as you go. What that means is basically just that because we never know like the exact value of a stack without some kind of a model, that we're approximating through it. Now, I'm not going to run ICMizer. It's not really going to run or apply to this spot. But that's a good tool that can let you make better pre-flop decisions in ICM-based scenarios. So scanning the stack sizes here, we see there's a chip leader 3 to our left with about 60 blinds. There is one very short stack with 10 big blinds, 2 to our right. And then there are a bunch of basically 19 to 35 big blind stacks, which are all kind of middling stacks, I would say. So definitely some ICM pressure here. There's going to be more in the scenarios where we end up basically with somebody who's pretty short and shorter than us, because we have the opportunity to fold and just ladder up somewhat easily, usually. But the thing is here that because there are still 8 players left, yes, we're on the final table, yes, there are pay jumps, but they're not the biggest pay jumps. This would be very different if there were 4 players or 5 players and one had, basically only 10 blinds. That would alter our strategy pretty dramatically. So here, the hero has Queen Jack of diamonds under the gun 8-handed and chooses to open to 2 big blinds. So first and foremost, I like this hand choice. This is going to play very well. We have a stronger than average range under the gun, so it allows us to open some of these types of hands without getting 3-bet as frequently. And I like this sizing. We don't really have to go bigger than this at these stack depths. We're also going to go heads up with the big blind. This is going to happen pretty often. It's going to be the player we're going to most likely play pots against, so no surprises there. And the flop comes out very good for this exact holding. Queen 10-6, two-tone. Big blind checks, which we sort of expect them to do with their whole range, and we have to decide whether to bet or not. I think that with this hand, we can target many worse holdings. Hands like a worse queen, a 10, a 6, flush draws, straight draws. I mean, there are basically infinite straight and flush draws here. So even though we have a flush draw ourselves, it definitely makes sense to bet. I actually like this sizing as well. I think on a lot of drier, kind of less dynamic board textures, we could go smaller because basically the nature of the board won't change as much. Many hands in our range that are value don't need as much protection, and hands in our range that are bluffs don't really have to go bigger because hands in our opponent's range will either kind of have something or they won't. So they're going to basically call somewhat inelastically, so we could go smaller. But on a more dynamic board, that's less true. So I like going bigger here. Something like 3 big blinds would probably be my starting point. I don't really mind this size, although we do have to be aware of the SPR that we're setting up, the stack to pot ratio. The big blind wakes up here and raises it to 10.01 big blinds. I don't know why he throws that 0.01 in there. And the hero has to decide whether to call or just get it in here. We come to this street with about 30 blinds, and I don't think that this hand is really ever going anywhere into the muck. You can't really just release this. The main thing going on here is just that we have so much equity against even our opponent's value range. We can hold hands like sets much more than they can, and the sets that they do have, like pocket sixes, there aren't that many. They're probably 3-betting and getting in with 10s and queens pre, so we don't have to worry that much about that. And yes, they have some 2 pairs, hands like queen 10, queen 6 suited, 10 6 suited, but they also just have a plethora of draws, straight draws, flush draws, combo draws, and even against the value hands, with this exact holding, we have a ton of equity. Hands like queen 10, we can hit a jack, we can hit a backdoor straight draw, and we can also hit a flush. On top of that, one of his most likely sort of bluff candidates will be like ace-x of diamonds and combo draws, and those don't have nearly as many outs as they feel like they do when we also have diamonds. So this would be pretty dicey if we just had like a black queen jack, I think, but with queen jack of diamonds, we're looking pretty good here. And I think that jamming has a little bit more merit than calling, simply because the hands in his range that can call, we're still performing very well against. And if we do get him to fold, it's actually very good for us. We get to win a pot that is pretty decently sized, puts us decisively into second place, and it's not really a bad outcome. Meanwhile, if he folds his equity, that's also very good for us because we don't have to take a bunch of variance in this spot. If he does call and gets it in, well, it's not really the end of the world either because we just have so much equity against that resulting range. Basically, this hand is just so good that even though it's sort of like a weak top pair in theory, in practice, it just functions very well. Hero does decide to call, and I just want to be clear that I don't think this is like a big mistake or anything like that. The main thing here is that it's much better to call than fold, and so it's certainly not a massive error to call rather than 3-bet jam, but I just prefer 3-bet jamming here. So here on the turn, it's the ace of spades, which is one of those weird cards that like could be a bit of an action killer when we are ahead, and when we're not ahead, this may be the card that got us there. The big blind could have something like ace-x of diamonds and check it. They could have a couple of like gut shots like ace-jack that play this way. I think it's a little bit less likely, but maybe ace-jack with the ace of diamonds. So I think that the decision here is, can we actually get value from the hands that we're beating, and how many are there? And then is that worth it the times where we put more money in against something like ace-x of diamonds, which is pretty disastrous, right? Given that the opponent can have ace-x of diamonds, we have to think about what are the other hands that we could get value from. And I think those are mostly king-x of diamonds, something like jack-9, I guess, maybe a couple of gutters. And I think that the gutters, for the most part, either make the top pair or will fold. So they're not really hands we can target with a bet that we actually want to have in there. And so I'm not really liking the option of betting. I very much like this decision to check, especially because if you look at the stacks behind, we're looking at literally like 20 blinds behind in a pot of 25 big blinds. So that's not really great because we also can't really bet a size that's not committing. I think we'd pretty much have to just go all in here if we're doing anything. Here it checks back, and the river is a jack, giving us 2 pair, but putting a 1-liner to a straight. Any king makes Broadway, which is the nuts on this board. And on top of that, King 9's already just Broadway, but 9-8 notably also comes in. So this is relevant because the big blind now jams, and he's sort of changing his story, right? He's sort of saying, I have Broadway, or at the very least 9-8. Now, the nice thing about that is the fact that if he's only representing straights, it means that the other types of hands he can have that come in here that beat us, he doesn't have. Hands like ace-jack, maybe a hand like ace-queen or ace-10, and then, certain other types of weird 2 pairs or sets probably would not do this. And that's pretty comforting. But at the same time, it is a board that feels pretty scary, and a board where obviously he can have some kings. But we need to kind of keep our head on straight and ask, how many are there, and is this player going to bluff when he doesn't have it? So first and foremost, what king X can he even have? It's possible a player could check raise this flop with king queen, but I think it's a little bit less common, especially at these stakes. You're just not going to see that as much. And then you have king X of diamonds, right? King Jack is also out there, but I think King Jack is more likely to continue barreling the turn when it basically makes Broadway. And so we're more likely to see a King X that wasn't in sort of the players, that hadn't made a straight until the river. So what we're going to see here is mostly a collection of King X of diamonds, a lot of which we block, right? King Queen, King Jack, King 10 are all blocked by the board. You have King 9, King 8, King 7, and then maybe they defend King 5 through King Deuce suited pre, but we don't really know based on this player. Now the next question is whether this player is capable of bluffing. Now in general, I think that there's a little bit of a curvature that happens with players at certain stakes. They kind of start out maybe being pretty bluffy at low stakes, get a little bit nittier on average at middling stakes, and then start to get more effective at bluffs in higher stakes. Now, the problem is that this is sort of an exception, I think, where this board texture allows for a lot of bluffs, period. Particularly in weaker players, because they just see, oh wow, this board could be really scary for my opponent. I can just go ahead and bet. And so this might kind of open the door without player reads to this person just sort of saying, hey, they checked back turn. They don't have ace king. They don't have, a lot of king X here. Probably not. Maybe not pocket kings, because maybe we check back pocket kings. But even if they're doing hand reading, if they're not doing hand reading, they're going to recognize that we may well have hands that are very scared of this board. And so I think that opens the door a little bit too wide for them. And they're just going to have way too many opportunities here to bluff. And even if they're not dramatically over bluffing, let's examine this spot from a just resulting outcome sort of thing. If we have a fold here, we'll have about 20 bigs. We'll be sort of middle of the pack to bottom of the pack, and this opponent will have moved up into decisive second place. If we call and win, we will be a decisive chip leader. Well, we'll be sort of tied with middle position, I guess. We'll have 67 big blinds. We'll be in very good shape, and there will be 2 very short stacks. So there will be a 10 big blind stack and a 2 big blind stack, which means that we'll have very profitable outcomes here. We'll be able to navigate toward first, second, and third at a much higher frequency, and that's a really big deal. If we call and we lose, we are out, and we can't win any more money. But if you actually look at the stack size array, the times that we just fold, we're just gonna ladder like 1 or 2 spots at a pretty reasonable frequency, and the rest of the outcomes are pretty small and just kind of randomly distributed. So for me, given that I think that a lot of bluffs here are possible, given that I think value is relatively minimal, I'm leaning very strongly toward a call here. I don't think a fold is sort of outrageous. I think that with player reads, I could easily swing one way or the other more strongly, but with no significant player reads here, this is just going to become a call for me and kind of live with the outcome. The other thing to keep in mind is if we call and lose here, it doesn't mean our call was wrong, right? Just because somebody has a hand in range that we knew they could have, something like King Jack of diamonds, King 9 of diamonds, he can't have King Jack of diamonds, King 8, King 7 of diamonds. If they have those hands, or maybe Black King Queen, or King Queen with the King of diamonds, something like that, then I'm not going to sweat the fact that I lose the hand because I expect them to have those hands in range. Now, if they have a hand I never expected, like pocket kings or ace king or, king nine offsuit or something like that, well, then I'm going to have to reevaluate whether I was really making the right decisions here, and maybe I didn't actually sort of have them pegged correctly. But, if they really show just about anything else, like, I'm going to feel pretty good about my spot regardless. And sometimes in tournaments, you just have to take these spots where you risk your tournament life on something that's not a sure thing. And that's how tournaments work. And some of the times you're going to win and some of the times you're not. And that's really part of why I think people gravitate to the game, is just this sheer up and down competition and drama and all this stuff. And shying away from that, I think, can really stunt you. And you can't be too afraid. Now, I don't think the poster actually gave us any spoilers here on what happened, so I'm very curious to know if he wants to post afterward. But thanks to AK Most for posting this hand. I will be posting many more of these in the future, and if you guys are ever interested in getting my input on a hand, feel free to post it in my Ask Me Anything thread. I think that will be linked down below. Thanks a lot. This has been Matt Vaughan for CardsChat, and I'll see you guys in another video very soon.